guest on. It's sort of timeless and dateless and ageless and all that stuff, even though we're in the midst of the World Series and he has written a song about his beloved Cubs. But anytime I get a rock and roll guy on, it really appeals to me and my almost famous background, especially on the back end of my reunion with the Smithereens last weekend in New Jersey. This is a guy that I interviewed. I think it was the third or fourth rock star I ever interviewed. I was 15, maybe 16 years of age at the News American when he was in one of the big bands in America at the time after Rocky III and Survivor and Eye of the Tiger and Vital Signs, and they were opening for REO Speedwagon at the then Baltimore Civic Center, and I want to welcome him on. He's been kind enough to spend a little time coming on with us, but there's a whole rock and roll Chicago baseball thing going on here. He was one of the founding members of Survivor as well as the Ides of March. They still perform as the Ides of March and have a song called Finally Next Year. It's been 30 years, 32 years since I've talked to Jim Peterick of Ides of March and Survivor, and it is a pleasure to have you on, sir. Welcome. Let's talk some rock and roll and sports, my friend.
Hey, Nestor, thanks for having me on, man. Yeah, man, I don't really remember that interview.
Of course you don't. Of course you don't remember that interview.
30 years ago, but I'd love to hear it. If you have that recorded, I got to see what I sounded like back in 84 or whatever that was. But, yeah, I left the band Survivor in 96, had some great days, great times. And I guess they're still out there. I really don't, stay in touch with them. But, man, the Vital Signs tour was one of my favorites. That's when we really started coming up into our own, after the whole Rocky thing. We got to prove ourselves that we could, have a hit record without a Stallone movie.
But you were, listen, I remember this vividly, and I was a kid, and I guess when you're a kid and Kevin Cronin's on the phone, or Paul Stanley, or Geddy Lee, or, Steven Tyler, and I have all of this stuff, including you. You were one of the real early ones, because I have the dates, and I went through this last year. My wife was sick. It was in early 1985. You guys were opening for REO on the Wheels Are Turning tour, and you both had done interviews with me that week, because I was previewing the concert, like in the, the calendar section of the newspaper back then, to help you sell some tickets and write about the band. And when I got Kevin Cronin on the phone, now look, man, there was no internet, right? So the only thing I had in front of me were your liner notes that your publicist sent me, the music itself, and I think everybody was familiar with Eye of the Tiger. I still love High on You and The Search is Over, and I Can't Hold Back, all those songs, Burning Heart as well. And I remember when Kevin Cronin was on the phone with me, he was trying to say to me, "You've never heard of the Ides of March? Like, what's wrong with you, man? I mean, I've got Jim Peterick, man. I'm just a vehicle, baby." And it was like he was singing Vehicle to me, and I had never heard it, right? And I'll never forget that. And then I had to, I wouldn't say Google you up. There was no Google in 84, Jimmy. I mean, so I had to go to the record store and find cassettes and find 8-tracks and stuff to learn about the history of music. Now it's all sitting there on YouTube,
Yeah. Well, Kevin's a great friend, and he, believe it or not, he was head of the student council in his high school, and he hired the Ides of March to play their big dance. He was just a fan. I mean, he was already learning guitar. I was a few years older than he, which he never lets me forget, and he hired the Ides of March because he really liked our first hit, You Wouldn't Listen, from '66. And then a couple of years after he hired us, we had the big breakthrough with Vehicle. He's still one of my dearest friends, and he's always singing my praises, and I'm always singing his praises.
Well, you guys toured together, and that must have been special at that time for both of the bands, really getting toward the zenith of where your musical careers would go, and album sales and tours and playing, big arenas. And, at that time you were playing the Baltimore Civic Center and playing even bigger arenas than that. I saw you guys down at Wolf Trap later on when you went out after you had all the success with Vital Signs, because you were really into it at that point. But what I've noticed all these years, and the guys in Styx have been so incredibly magnanimous over the years. I mean, I've kept these friendships, and even Dennis DeYoung through the years, and they've split. And I see all these bands split up, but the Chicago, the Illinois, the Midwestern music scene of the late 60s and early 70s, Cheap Trick, it's like all you guys sort of stuck together in some way,
Well, it's true, and I'm really still dear friends with Rick Nielsen and Tommy Shaw, and Dennis DeYoung lives 2 blocks from my house. We'll go to breakfast together, or get together and just to hear his new stuff. And it's really incredible.
Tell me about Ides of March and what you're doing. Now, I know you got the Cubs song, and we can go through the history of all of it and how you became a Cubs fan, and obviously everybody in that part of the world. I mean, I have a little go-go White Sox in me. That's how I get along with Cronin because of the South Side and, my lineage with my cousin and the statue out in center field there that I visited this summer when I came to see Pearl Jam play Wrigley Field. And there's a lot of music going on around the Cubs. I mean, Eddie Vedder's all about it, and, obviously sitting next to Theo. And, I remember when there was always a song for every team. Every successful team had a song, right?
Well, and that's the way we felt. And we wrote a song called Finally Next Year. And, of course, the hook is, every year they say, well, next year. Well, it's finally next year. And I think it's just it's a really fun song. I wrote it with Scott May, who's the keyboard player of the Ides of March. Ides of March now have been together since 1964. But you're talking about 53 years. The original four guys, me, Larry Millis, Mike Borch, and Bob Berglund, we were in Cub Scouts together. I mean, this is one of those family stories. And we go out and we kick butt. We still love it. We have a great horn section that we carry. Scott May, it's an 8-piece group. And the other day we were on a radio station in Chicago, and we premiered our song Finally Next Year. And it's the big hook is, hey, hey, holy cow. It's finally next year. Let's stand up and shout. Hey, hey, being the Jack Brickhouse. Hey, and the holy cow being, Harry Carey. So, it's like, hey, holy cow. It's finally next year. Let's stand up and shout. It's just get them all cooking. And, of course, the big song is Go Cubs Go, which my dear old friend Steve Goodman wrote. But we're trying to give that one a little bit of a run for its money.
Well, you know what? There's so much music around the Chicago scene, as we've pointed out. And, you talk about the Ides of March and that being a band of your childhood. And here all these years later, I mean, Survivor was kind of your side project, right? I mean, you had this other thing long before you had Eye of the Tiger, right?
Well, we did, but I wouldn't call it a side project. But it was certainly, a different animal than Ides of March. Ides of March was very much a family. We slept in the same U-Haul together. We came up as kids. And Survivor was very much, we picked people that we felt could do the best job musically. And I'm not saying it was more of a business than pleasure, but there was more. There wasn't the same camaraderie with the certain members of Survivor than there was with the Ides of March. But in terms of making music, when we got together and we cut a record, man, Survivor was totally happening.
When I hear the old Ides of March stuff, I hear Chicago. I hear the Chicago Transit Authority, as you'd know it. That must have been something about a sound there, right? Coming out of the South in the 60s up into the Chicago area, that horns were involved in it, maybe Memphis. It really is a unique period, I think, and a unique sound that a lot of bands had a lot of brass and had a Chicago Transit Authority kind of sound that they brought to the masses, right?
Yeah, we got horns not to play, Vehicle. I didn't know that song. I wrote it 3 years later. We got brass to play Memphis. We the Stax stuff, the Volt stuff, James Brown. I feel good, and hold on, I'm coming, and all that stuff. That's why we got horns. And then Chicago came around, and they kind of introduced the jazz rock element of things. And the Ides of March went to see Blood, Sweat, and Tears at Chicago at the Kinetic Playground in Chicago. For $5, you got to see probably Led Zeppelin, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and Pacific Gas and Electric all in one night.
That's a pretty good night. That's a good night. I'd like to have a ticket stub from that one.
A typical night at Kinetic Playground. And one night we went to see Blood, Sweat, and Tears. They were on the bill with Jethro Tull. And, man, they blew us away. And I had already written Vehicle. In fact, I handed off a cassette to David Clayton Thomas. He wouldn't take it. And on that cassette was Vehicle. So I trotted upstairs to the dressing room, and I gave it to Steve Katz. He took the tape, okay? But apparently he didn't listen to it because the record went number one. We run into Blood, Sweat, and Tears at the Atlanta airport. And they said, hey, congratulations on your number one record, that Vehicle song. I said, yeah, that's on that effing tape that I gave you guys a year ago. and Steve Katz goes, no kidding. Oh, my God.
So you got to start, at that point, you got to start listening to the tapes back then. I mean, when you're in the music business in that period of time, trying to get signed, trying to get your band over, then you form Survivor, to have a #1 hit, and to three and a half decades back, you could be walking anywhere in life and hear these songs. And that could be said for Styx, for Cheap Trick, for, or any of those bands. But, that's got to be a good vibe for you, that you did something that really had staying power, that some knucklehead like me is going to call you 32 years later and talk about High on You or The Search is Over, right?
Yeah, well, staying power is the whole thing, and it blows me away. The stories I get from people that have been married or buried to Search is Over.
Wow.
Of course, the ones that were buried aren't there to tell about it, but the stories that I Had the Tiger motivated people to, fight cancer and get to the top of the corporate ladder and just go beyond what they ever thought they could do. That is the greatest feeling and the greatest royalty I could ever receive. It makes you feel like you did something,
He is Jim Peterick. He is the founding member of the Ides of March and still with the Ides of March and, of course, Survivor back in the 80s. And I literally found you, through, like, the by. I said to Ray, hey, see if you can find some of these old rock stars I had, that I interviewed 30 years ago when I was a newspaper guy. And he found you. And it turns out you're writing a Cubs song, so that makes it even better. So give me the motivation for that. Are you a Cubs fan or were you a White Sox guy?
Well, my dad and grandpa were Cubs fans, which doesn't make any sense because we were Southsiders. Nonetheless, I grew up in a house that was all about the Cubs.
Wow.
But when I grew up, the Sox started calling the Ides of March to do the anthem and these different 70s nights and all that. I got to really, really enjoy the Sox as well. So you could say I'm kind of a bi-coastal guy, South Side, North Side. There'll always be a soft spot in my heart for the Cubs because of my dad and grandpa. So we wrote this song from our hearts, and we name-checked, some of the great players in this team. And, of course, the Joe Madden, the manager, and Rizzo. Rizzo's going to tag you out at first base. He's the finest man there since the great Mark Grace. Bryant knows Ron Santos got his back. Jake, Kyle, and John, they're a strikeout act. And every home run, give a nod of thanks to the greatest Cub of all, Mr. Ernie Banks.
I tell you what, I remember Chicago. When I think of great Chicago sports songs, you got to throw the Super Bowl Shuffle in there, right?
You've got to. You've got to, man. It's funny you should say that. I'm going to a party, Christmas party, and the original Super Bowl or Shuffle guys are going to be at this party, and we're going to perform that song.
Yeah, you know what? You got to get that ad on Periscope or Facebook Live for me, Jim. I appreciate that.
Got to.
Hey, man, it was great catching up with you. I really appreciate the time and you chiming in. The song is finally next year. You can find it out on YouTube, and you can always Google Jim Peterick. That's Peterik, out in the great city of Chicago, Illinois, and rooting on the Cubs and writing songs and still playing rock and roll. You guys get out with the Ides of March. How often do you tour? Just more in the Midwest, or do you get around the country a little bit, Jim?
Well, we do touring mainly in the Midwest, but now we're kind of doing this the rock and roll ship thing, and we're doing the Moody Blues Cruise again in the beginning of 18. We did it last year, and those cruises are just so fun. And you don't just stay in your cabin. We mingle with the crowd, and we were with the Zombies and Vanilla Fudge and jamming with Mark Farner, and so we're getting out there. It's a great show.
Nice, man. Anytime you get together with a little Grand Funk and put some music on. I mean, I see a lot of the boats. I mean, I see the heavy metal boats and the soft rock boats. And, it's kind of neat. And I guess people get on the boat and they get a week of rock and roll right on built in with the buffet and all the good things that are on those cruises. Really great to visit with you, Jim. I appreciate the time. I will forward over the old version of you and I talking, the 15-year-old version of me. Mr. Peterick, tell me about your band. So... I appreciate you coming on.
I would love to hear that. And I got one thing to leave you with, Nestor. You ready?
Sure.
Great God in heaven, you know I love you. Ba-da-ba-ba-da-da.
There you go, man. Hey, I appreciate the time. It was great visiting. Thank you so much.
You rock, man. Thank you.
You got it. Jim Peterick from the Ides of March and is formerly of Survivor, still with the Ides of March and putting that together. And all the hits back in the 80s, if you remember, Eye of the Tiger and Rocky 3 and Rocky 4 and Burning Heart and all that, Can't Hold Back, all those great songs. Great of him to chime in. I'm trying to find all my old rock and roll guys. I put those the interviews last summer out. We're going to do that again, I think, coming up here during the holidays as well. And my wife and I have a little holiday planned in February. Well, you'll get our Rock Week. Rock Week will be coming back, I promise you. Anything you find that out on the internet, and as well as all the rock and roll interviews, they are all available in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault. So if you want to hear the old Daryl Hall stuff or the old David Bowie stuff or the old Paul Stanley stuff or the old Bon Jovi stuff, it's all up there. Just go check it out. And I will continue to try to find some young old rock stars to chat with me from time to time. I'm Nestor Nasty at WNST.net. Finds me out on the internet, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, and anywhere your mobile device takes you. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.